Good afternoon, Hisham.
Good afternoon, bonjour.
I'm good. I'm Professor Dilip. I'm welcoming you to our short session on this, what you would say, a webinar session, which is connected to the topics which you are so familiar with. So let me introduce your good self to this audience, first of all. Um, uh, it is what you would say the trend of us usually try to introduce yourself, then soon after that you can go ahead with your presentation. And let me talk a little bit about our today's speaker. uh, Hisham Odgri is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Enigma, a New York-based data intelligence company working with several Fortune 500 companies, including Merck, American Express, ADP, and Lot. From building compliance programs that prevent financial crime to tracking effects of pharmaceuticals to improve patient safety, Enigma connects and enriches the client's data assets to maximize value, making data tangible and bringing it closer to the world we live in. Its Hisham's passion. So previously, Hisham managed the private sustainable finance program at the BMCE Bank in partnership with the World Bank Group to create energy models for large-scale alternative energy projects across Africa. And beyond that, he supported an energy fund in Dallas, Texas, where he is responsible for hedging physical energy assets against modeled counterparts in electronic markets. And he's having the qualifications from Columbia University, the degree, and he studied philosophy and mathematics in his background. So we got a wonderful entrepreneur and a technology executive, a senior leader, to have an interaction with him. And I warmly welcome dear Hisham on the behalf of Africa Business School and our Dean, Dr. Yunus, warmly welcome you to our business school. Welcome to the short session, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bonjour. Salam alaikum. Bon, il est un peu tôt ici à New York. You may see my daughter run into the room. We're all working from home. So if you see a 5-year-old, hold on. I'm just going to wipe my camera 1 second. Because I think it's a little smudgy. All right, everyone. Hey, I have a couple of questions for the group, and anyone can answer. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you all are studying and researching? Maybe 1 to 2 minutes, just to give me some more context. Is it particularly technology focused, of business? Just a little bit more context about the program. I'm super curious.
Okay. Hi, Hisham. This is Nisreen. And I think that we've met when we've met. I was an entrepreneur, and I was working on an education platform in order to help Moroccan students to gamify the courses, etc. And now I'm a student at and I'm working on entrepreneurship. I didn't still define my my subject, but entrepreneurship and support organizations, and how can the ecosystem influence the success of entrepreneurs in the African context. And thank you very much. I think we missed. Is Hisham?
Yes. Très bien, Nisreen.
Okay.
عندك
And I'm so glad to talk to you again.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about data and a couple of trends that I think are important to understand in data. and leave plenty of room for questions and answers. It's a pretty short presentation. I'm mostly a practitioner myself. Like, I'm a data scientist. I'm still involved in analyzing data, mostly for fun. My team doesn't really let me put anything into production anymore. But I think I can talk to you about Enigma and the work we do more broadly, maybe afterwards if anyone's interested in shooting me an email or something like that. But I'm going to talk pretty generally about what I see going on in data. And Enigma is really an external data company. Like, we work with a lot of data that companies have, but our main technology and asset is data that we gather from the world around us, be it from public sources or from online, turning that into intelligence for people to make decisions. And let me just share my screen. Can you all confirm that you see my my screen right now?
Still not for me.
Not yet.
Et maintenant?
We can see it now.
Now we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay. So the early in my career, I became in love with this idea of using data to get answers. And there's this quote that I like to start a lot of these things by, which is from a statistician professor decades ago, who says, in God we trust, all others bring data, right? The notion that you are an expert in something intuitively, I think, is one that the history of science has really come to disprove, right? Science and research is mostly a process of doing experiments, taking a look at the data, trying to understand correlations between things, and then moving forward and having a point of view that becomes, not truth, but at least the consensus on the moment and what the data tells us directionally. And, that way of thinking, as opposed to a more theoretical way of thinking, was something that was became more and more important to me, in my career and in making, decisions in the world. And what I'd like to start out with is this notion that, data science, right, and the science of using data to analyze things beyond the theoretical is very, very, very old, right? Let's take this example right now. I've been thinking a lot about the coronavirus, and there's been a really rich history, even in the medical field, of using data to get answers that aren't to mind. Is this nurse, this woman in England, in 1859, who was basically the mother of the modern nursing practice. Her name's Florence Nightingale, and she was a very accomplished nurse in London, came from a very prominent family, and her family, gave her a lot of hard time for going into the nursing field. She really wanted to, help. At the time, women were not really allowed into the medical profession proper, become a doctor, and nursing wasn't, that important of a thing. But she developed the practice, started a nursing school, became pretty famous, pretty well recognized in London for having, brought nursing into hospitals, etc. So much so that when the British were at war, I believe this was in Turkey at the time, there was a war, and British soldiers were dying, very intensively after, not on the battlefield, but afterwards. And they're saying, like, what is happening? Why are we losing so many soldiers? And she volunteered to go tour the battlefield, and where the soldiers were being taken care of after their wounds. And what she did was, very simple data science exercise, which she was just basically doing mini autopsies left and right, understanding what people had died of. And these charts, which are called like polar vortex charts, which basically show month by month the deaths in the soldiers and the reasons why they died, right? And in blue is the number of soldiers that died for very preventable reasons, like wounds that got infected or something along those lines. This is a pretty pivotal moments in the British Army's understanding of medicine, was that, it's not doctors that we need to do surgeries or amputation. No, we actually need nurses to take care of all of these little wounds, to make sure people have water, to make sure that the water is disinfected, to make sure, and that most of the soldiers' deaths were actually due to this kind of malpractice on a little level. And it wasn't until she published these charts that this kind of mentality changed, honestly, like the British kind of military history for a long time. And it was really, really fascinating. So I thought I'd bring up something a little historical just to kick this off. Another historical thing, we are, in the United States going through a very interesting time right now with, kind of racism and confronting these issues of racism. In the 1900s, a very, very famous sociologist named W.E.B. Du Bois did a very comprehensive data study and data visualization of the economic condition of Black people in the United States. And it was very important. It was like a precursor to the in the U.S. Census, and kind of designed some of the most important questions in the census on the lens of the disparity in between Black Americans and white Americans. And this is in the 1900s. And so my point being, mostly just using a couple of topical examples, that data is very old. Artificial intelligence, which is a very important part of data science now, i.e. teaching a computer how to think, algorithmic thought, and information theory, is also extremely old. If anyone's interested kind of in a research topic in the history of artificial intelligence, I point you to, Claude Shannon in 1948, who really understood that you could teach a computer to solve certain kind of problems on its own and iterate, and that you didn't have to, design the whole program and the heuristics. If you had enough data, the computer could read it over time, organize the information, and solve complex mathematical problems. So if you take a look at kind of the history of data, you really have, statistics, and what you see, there's a lot of domain expertise every time applied to this. I think data science and statistics has been here for a while. The real shift in kind of unlocking the value of data, in my opinion, this not well-known company who invented the concept of parallel computing, called Thinking Machines Corporation, which was founded in 1983 and was actually a pretty failed as a business, right? So they invented the ability for a computer not only to solve a problem, but to break down the problem in multiple concurrent parts and solve it in parallel, right? which all of our computers today use parallel processing, right? It enables them to go much faster, and it's how, you know, we realized that we could, you know, create computer chips that were that we could fit more and more and more and more computational capacity into, that could actually be used, because we could break down the problem pretty quickly. So in 1983, you know, I'd say was the first kind of corporate implementation of a lot of the theory in AI from the 50s. You know, their first supercomputers that they built for the medical space, they were designed to research and analyze data for, you know, curing cancer, data for developing new drugs, and it was just a difficult space to commercialize in, you know. And you have this kind of history of companies trying to build supercomputers, but it wasn't really until, you know, we understood how to scale down processors and stack them in to servers, subcomponents, mostly by the demands in the early 2000s of the World Wide Web. I think the most important kind of moment in history for data is basically not the technological progress, but the human need, right? And when the internet was created, there was so much demand on the technology community. You had millions and millions of people, and then billions and billions and billions of people, and we had some real problems to solve. One of the most famous ones, a web page that I want to find, right? And Google and the creation of the MapReduce algorithm. And then from that came all of the technologies that we know about from data today. Hadoop, which is a technology to store big data, process big data. TensorFlow, which is a technology to productize machine learning and feedback loops. Pandas, which is like a Swiss Army knife programming tool for data scientists. And if you think about it, when you say, you know, data, what is it that we're doing? We're really democratizing intelligence, right? I think one of the most exciting things in the last 20 years, if you think about it, you know, we've kind of gotten to the point where we're automating manufacturing, right? There's kind of a straight path towards, you know, hey, building a car or building a plane, or, you know, processing, you know, raw materials. Like, the factory is getting more and more and more automated. But intelligence now is the thing that's going to start getting industrialized. And the very that was, well, how do we get everyone on the planet access to every piece of information and every piece of knowledge, right? And that's really through search, through Google. The content was there. But now, you know, if you want to learn about, you know, almost any topic, you can go to the internet. And what's happening in the data science industry right now, and in companies like ourselves, is we're realizing that we can actually teach a computer kind of anything about the world, right? Much like Google can teach a human being anything like the world. What if we could do that for computers? What if we could automatically link all of this information together and link up all of these computers? Can we have some really, really smart things starting to happen? Like, you know, can we find everyone involved in, you know, sex trafficking of people? Can we find, you know, in financial transactions, can we look at financial transactions that go from one criminal to another, you know, people disappearing at the same time, you know, things like that? Can we find fraud? Can we understand the impact of a political program, right? If, you know, right now there's being a lot of subsidies being given in the world economy. Can we understand, can we model that? Can we simulate that? What will that look like? And that's really what's going on, is we're starting to encode the knowledge that we have as human beings into data for computers to consume, to simulate, to predict, and to play off of each other in real time. I think that as a concept is probably one of the most exciting things for me. And I want to talk about kind of, in our business and in our, just general landscape, kind of 6 concepts that I think are important to know in terms of why data is hard, and then really, kind of what are the impacts of getting this right on the economy that I find exciting. So, why data is hard, I think, is it really requires multiple skills coming together, right? The first, from a human talent perspective, in the last 10 years, we've seen phenomenal progress in the advance of data science as a skill that's being taught and learned. But most of this has been in the private sector. I mean, it's only in the last 3, 4, 5 years have data science programs even emerged at universities, right? And, if you think about it, if I told you, hey, medicine is only something that we study now for the last 5 years, I don't know if you would trust your doctor, right? And very similarly, like data science is something that really was born in the field at companies like Google, at companies like Netflix and Amazon and all of these places, crunching data for a specific need. That's just starting to come into academia to learn the best practices, to learn the scientific rigor. But now it's also going into other areas of the private sector, in healthcare, in banking, in transportation. And the difficult is, again, it's really 3 things. It's the statistics, the computer science, and the domain expertise. Like if you want to make some change in the world, you need to know what it is that you're talking about. If you're talking about transportation, you need to know habits of people. You need to think about people when people want to go to work. You have to think about where people are based in the city. You have to think about urban planning. You don't just need kind of the hard skills and skills that you learn from a science perspective, but you also need to understand kind of the cultural realities of the topic or the industry that you're going into. So that's one. The talent, I think, we are very short on the talent needed to make even more significant progress in data, and I really think it is, as a field, something that's growing by the day. The second thing is you have, the technologies, right? The problem here is that there has been so much proliferation in infrastructure. Today, to spin up a database with billions and billions and billions of points of data is something that is very abstracted. Even 8 years ago when I started my company, it would take us 5 days to do something today that we can do in 4 hours, right? Not just computing time, but setup time and installing time and configuring time. And one of the problems is, because there's been so much demand, there's been so many different new tools, and the learning curve is getting steeper because there's no clear standards yet, right? It's not like, hey, if you're in the creative field, you use Photoshop, or you use something like that. If you're making movies, you use this piece of software or that piece of software. I think the complexity of it and the newness of it has made it where everyone is still experimenting, everyone's still building on the fly, and that's, I think, a trend that's interesting to understand in an emerging industry. It's kind of the lack of the standards. The third is, the talent, the technologies, and then the data itself. Like, how do we even organize the world for a computer to understand, right? When we talk at higher levels, let's say like thinking about population, okay? And I'll give you a local example. When you think about a population of Casablanca, and you know how many millions of inhabitants, okay, that's fine. What can I do with that piece of information? Well, I can understand how much money the city needs. Okay, yeah, I know there's, I don't know how many people in Casablanca, what, 8 million, something like that? Is that too much? 6 million? I forget. But okay, this is the rough budget of the city. All right, now we get into more difficult questions like, well, where do these people live? What parts of the city? What, you know, because depending on that, you know, I can allocate where I'm going to build roads. Okay, that's good. We know roughly what neighborhoods. Well, how many people live on which street? Where do I place a hospital? Where do I place a school? You know, where do I, you know, put the different stops of the tram and the bus? And now we're starting to, you know, look at a geography and encode data points at a much higher resolution. If the way Casablanca encodes its geography is different than the way Rabat encodes its geography or Marrakesh encodes its geography, you know, we start to have incompatibilities in between things, right? And generally, we have a problem right now in the data science community of not having really the in and out of the and you know, the person view or the latitude longitude point view with a lot of consensus in the community. We still don't know how to organize what the world looks like for a computer to consume and exchange information with another. We have very localized implementations of information theory, design, and structure. This is actually one of the biggest problems in data, and we're, you know, even in the private sector, you know, if you, let's say you're, you know, 10 banks, and you want to share information on people that are bad actors, that are fraudulent. Well, how do I collect mine? How do we know if the person is the same across these two, you know, different institutions? Each institution has kind of mapped its own entities, right? The objects in the data in a different way. Compatible. It's almost like, if data is language, you know, one person is speaking, you know, English, another person is speaking French, and that mapping problem, I think, is, you know, one of the more important trends to look out to in data, and to understand, you know, when you're at a business perspective, that organization of this compatibility of your data with other databases is a very strong advantage, and something, you know, have a strong process for, have very, very strong programs in terms of constant curation and these sort of things to really take advantage of your data, right? Taking advantage of your data is about linking it into other processes in the world. So I think those three trends, confluence of skills, super important. The other kind of three things that happen, I think, you know, once you think about data's impact, is, in my opinion, what's happening in regards to the decentralization of the economy. So basically, the point being is, you know, if you get this right, if people have the skills, if the talent is there, if the technology is there, if we're mapping the world correctly, everyone has an information advantage, right? Or everyone has the ability to get an information advantage. So how do we think about how this is going to impact the economy? And this is not just about innovation. This is really about, you know, in my opinion, the fiber of the economy changing. So a couple of things. One is, we see a difference in pattern in capital flows. right? The venture capital community or the innovation economy is really driven by the venture capital economy, which is a completely different approach than prior forms of investment, which are all about the consolidation of capital into certain companies and what we've seen in the last 30 years of corporate conglomeration, right? There's been, let's kind of pause for a second, right? If you take a look at the biggest companies in the world, they have been merging and merging and merging and merging together to benefit from economies of scale, right? To benefit from a variety of things that would make their operations more efficient. But the innovation model actually requires much, much more R&D and says, okay, if we have an information advantage and if we can start using that, let's use a portfolio model towards creation of value and let many, many people, just like science, have experiments and we'll promote the best ones, right? So yes, of course, all big companies are competing against each other, but their mutual threads have been to, consolidate. Whereas you have a different kind of design of capital flow now, which is not let's like buy companies and merge them together, which is really the job of private equity, right? And what we've been seeing since the 80s. But venture capital emerging as a class competitive to private equity, thinking about a different way of doing things, which is let's start something fresh and actually disrupt the very way in which companies have been maintaining their advantage. Now, speaking of that competitive scale that companies have, like let's say, a very, very large clothing company like a Zara or whatever, you would imagine, okay, they have warehouses, they have distribution centers, they have retail stores. It's very, very easy for them to launch the next brand or the next, fashion line or something like that. But that competitive scale is actually no longer valuable, right? So if you think about it, very easy for someone to start a shop online, right? It's very easy for someone to distribute their goods online, to have payment systems online. If you take a look at a company like Stripe, it takes you 5 minutes to set up accepting a credit card for money in your bank account, right? And also, because folks like Zara and all of these other companies have been outsourcing their infrastructure in the last 20 years, right? Less and less companies actually own the manufacturing part of the supply chain. Well, guess what? Those new owners are interested in giving fractional capacity out. So if I need to go to a factory, very easy for me to get, 1/100th of the supply, just like WeWork in desk space, just like, a variety of other businesses. Fractional ownership and getting fractional capacity at a factory, super easy. If you take a look at, the beverage sector in the United States, Coca-Cola, or even the people who produce beer and alcohol, people who produce ice cream, their biggest threat right now is not another big competitor coming out with better product, is they're getting their market share eaten by small brands that launch one drink, one ice cream, one new like local beer that catches on, that goes viral. And then guess what? Advertising is no longer concentrated in channels like TV. It's now at the individual level because of data, right? It is better to target people at the individual level than it is to say, let's put all of our money on an ad at 3 p.m. on the TV and hope that our audience sees it. So the competitive value of scale, needing to have enough money to put a TV ad, all of this stuff is less and less valuable. So one last thing is insight over establishment, right? This is basically this concept of just because you're established, from a capital perspective, from an infrastructure perspective. You know, what you need to use that establishment for is actually mining your data and gaining insight. If you don't, someone else will come and get it for you. We've seen this in the fintech sector in the United States, where $100 billion banks have been disrupted by companies with $50 million in funding, who are offering loans to people, who are offering the ability to refinance their mortgages for their homes or refinance their student debt at cheaper rates because they understand niche markets of the population. And, you know, basically, as we're seeing the economy decentralize into smaller, more competitive components, we understand that the reason is basically insight can win over prior establishments at a pretty scary level. And I think that's very exciting. I think that makes it for, you know, a world where, you know, competition can be more fairly distributed across actors, and that's why I'm so excited about data. So I'll stop there. I don't know how long I've been talking because I've been sharing my screen for this long, but yeah, I'll take any questions the group has, and I hope that was helpful. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Hisham, for your presentation. So the student can ask their question if they want.
Hello, Mr. Rashid. Thank you very much, Hisham. Pardon. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question regarding companies that want to be data-driven. What are the major challenges that those companies are facing in today's digital age? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or should I?
No, I can hear you. Good question. So, what are the major challenges facing those companies? Listen, really one challenge, which is basically HR and process, right? So, if you have the talent who knows how to do this kind of work, you know, you will succeed. It's a cultural problem at companies. Companies, you know, have all of the data, have the ability to process it, and just don't put the right people in charge who manage with data and decision making, but manage with, you know, careerism and politics and these sort of things. You know, putting data to work right now is really about hiring the right people, giving them the focus, giving them the mandate, looking at the results very scientifically and saying, oh my God, you know, I think our customers would really like that product. And you know what? If we look at our, you know, costs, if we do X, Y, and Z, we can actually make it cheaper for the customer and compete, right? You know, we see this in marketing all the time, where marketers are very, very focused on the branding, what the message is going to be, et cetera, without looking at the results and saying, did people really like this? Were they very engaged? You know, because they just spent millions and millions and millions, you know, running a new campaign. They're not understanding whether the impact of that campaign was super successful. Or maybe they should have done something like test 3 different campaigns in 3 different geographies and promoted the best one. It's really a cultural shift that needs to happen from we hire experts and we hire experience, which is important. Experience is extremely important. But marrying that with, hey, let me just look at the data and see what it tells me and be very objective. So I think kind of having the people in place and having that mindset is the biggest barrier to entry to this problem. And I've seen that time and time again at, you know, the biggest companies in the world, right? No one is ahead of the game yet. other than companies that are very kind of digitally native or data native companies who are born out of this. Think about it this way. Every single product interaction that you have with Google flows back to a central data set, right? Every time you open a link or send an email or click on a web, every single time that piece of information goes to a central spot that is shareable by every product manager for analytics. And if you look at their teams, they're constantly analyzing their data and debating each other, right? First of all, the data has to be very much shared in the company. And that is, again, a cultural mindset, which you can get to. I think the infrastructural problems are actually pretty small.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. I have another question related to data. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have another question related to data innovation. Because data innovation is mostly non-tangible, how is it managed across an enterprise? So if if we have employees and have access to data and they have insights from this data and they can generate some innovation from this data. I don't like the management of innovation across enterprise.
Why would you say it's non-tangible?
It's yeah, you're right. Yeah.
The whole point is that it's tangible. The whole point. If it's non-tangible, it's not data, right? So, like, show me the numbers. You have an idea? Okay, prototype it. Okay, let's test it. Right? The testing is the important part. The willingness to test and the ability to like smell the ROI a little bit, like, is this gonna be valuable or not? That's fine. Manage expectations when you manage data projects. Many will fail. Some will succeed, right? And just because you're doing data and just because you're doing innovation doesn't mean that you're doing things better. One of my investors told me this, which is my favorite quote in all of business is, don't confuse activity with progress, right? Just because there's a lot of activity and people are doing a lot of things in a new and an exciting way, don't think that that's actually impactful for your business until you set out to study, the numbers and the actual impact. It is very important in everything that you do that you make the study of impact the most important part of the equation in data innovation, right? It's not how you do things, it's really the impact. And data innovation can be super simple. Like I said, I showed you this chart from this nurse in the 1859 who went alone to the battlefield. Like, that is extreme innovation and is very simple. She just went to count things and drew them on a piece of paper and like changed the course of history. And so it's really the study of impact, which I think is the most important tool in measuring data innovation, with, of course, setting the right expectations, especially in a corporate environment where people are, political and all of this stuff. You just gotta, under promise and over deliver, and remember that, innovation is really like a scientific approach, very portfolio based. You try many things, you see what works, you double down on that. You don't bet all of your things in one basket. If that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very insightful. Thank you.
Mr. Hisham, I have a question, please.
Victor.
Well, my question is related to data analytics, to big data with research as the title, as you know, as you mentioned the big data, you need to have a good knowledge in computer science, Java for Hadoop and Kafka and Spark, Python for TensorFlow and Panda, for example, and everything. But here in PhD, we are students on ABS. We are not all in good knowledge in computer science, like in Java and Python and everything. So how can we use these tools in research in PhD? And otherwise, not all students have the same knowledge of coding and computer science.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So here's what's going to happen in the next 10 years, right? Is that, you know, Python is going to be the new Excel, right?
Yes.
And we have to start learning the tools of data analysis, right? We have to start teaching it very, very young, very, very young. Programming, you know, I mean, let's put it this way.
It's the language of future in any case.
Yeah, it's very much so a language of the future. It is not difficult, right? As many people think, right? Some of the math behind the algorithms is difficult. You'll always need experts. You always need PhDs in math and physics and this sort of thing. But, you know, start learning how, you know, to be more advanced and sophisticated with Excel. Start learning how to be more advanced and sophisticated with Python. You know, at our company, I make sure that product managers are very fluent in Python. And if they're not, I point them to courses online and I say, hey, you have 3 months to learn this stuff. You know, you have a degree. You honestly, calculus or, you know, algebra, which we all learn as, you know, people you know, as teenagers, is more difficult than some of the programming that you need to learn to be effective in data. Statistics can be quite tricky science, but it's doable, I think. And so, you know, if you're going to learn a skill on the side, learn, you know, numerical science, Python, right? Learn Python that you're going to be able to use statistically. Learn Excel.
Yes, my question, Mr. Hisham, so sorry to interrupt you. The question is, during this 4 year, we are student of first year, so we have 4 years. We have research, meanwhile, we have in the same time. And you know that Java, for example, for big data and Python took time. It's not easy to take it on 2 days or 2 days tutorial of YouTube in 6 hours. You need to practice with file, with CSV, with pandas, with many news, and we can know and we can see on Medium articles that pandas is not an efficient way. There is new technology, so to begin and to start from scratch during this 4 year, it's not easy, I think. So do you have any suggestion, or just we should go and make some Coursera or Udemy course? In my case, I'm a computer science engineer, but I'm talking about my colleagues in PhD.
Well, I'll give you the good news and the bad news, okay? So the bad news, you know, and I think I mentioned this in my talk, is that every day there's like a new technology this, new technology that, you know, Pandas is great, now we're using, you know, Databricks and all that. That's normal, right? In a space that's moving as fast as this. However, the abstractions only get better for us. The libraries only get stronger. The amount of knowledge that people are able to encode and share in open source only gets stronger. So at the end of the day, you're kind of resting on the shoulder of giants over and over and over. As long as you learn one language, right, you kind of learned all of the concepts that you need to pick something up. It's really a first big hump. And this is just my personal experience. You know, I didn't study computer science, right? I learned how to program from, you know, YouTube videos and things like that. And it wasn't like as popular as it is now when I was in school. And listen, I don't think I'm like an exception. I think a lot of people are learning how to program, you know, on the fly. You know, they have this kind of hacker school I think, associated to you guys. What is it, 1337? Do you know that?
Yes, it's in our school. It's in UM6P here in Ben Gurion.
Yeah, look at what they're doing. It's amazing, right? It's amazing. And so you need the academic business principles, but at the same time, you need the kind of do-it-yourself principles. And I think, you know, as long as you learn to play, you know, to what's it called, to be proficient in one language, I think you can adapt and learn more quickly others. I think that's the good news. And I think the good news is it will get easier over time, but having that one experience where you went a little deep will allow you to use the libraries further and further. And then the other secret, which I probably get in trouble for telling, you know, students, is like, by the way, you're going to learn most of this stuff, you know, in the field at work, right? So use this time that you have to get as prepared as possible, but it's really when you have kind of real world problems facing you and that demand from, you know, whatever mission that you're trying to accomplish, that I think you learn stuff from people, you know, who have been in the job a couple of years before you and these sort of things. So I wouldn't worry too much about what specific skill to learn, but at least learn like one programming language. And, you know, if you can, like, do an easy one like Python and Java, just leave it up to other people. Like it.
No, it's so hard to learn Java and C++ for research. It's more R and Python.
Yeah, no, that's why, you know, at Enigma, we started out writing most of our algorithms in Scala, and then we dropped it because PySpark came out, right? And on Spark now, you can do everything that you would do with Scala in Python, and like, thank God. But, you know, it takes time, and people are working to consolidate things in a library view for folks.
Thank you so much for your answer and your time. Thank you so much.
Hi, community.
Yes.
Mr. Hisham, I want to thank you for this important presentation. I have one question. How we can ensure use the data in a good way to predict a new knowledge? We should respect some rules, for example. We need recommendations.
We should respect what?
Some rules, for example, for using the data in a good way.
Like tips for using data in a good way.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you another kind of high-level quote, which is, you know, all models are false. They're not the real world. Some are just useful, right? So remember that data is like a proxy science. You're never going to get to perfect prediction, but what you have to do is you have to test your predictions and how they hold over time. And you have to think about the real world as much as you think about, you know, the algorithm and the statistics in it, right? What's happening in the real world that's making my data make sense, right? If I'm trying to predict weather, okay, what is the physics of the atmosphere, right? I can't just look at the data and say tomorrow it's going to be sunny. I have to understand the physics of the atmosphere. If I'm trying to predict, you know, if someone is going to default on a, you know, on a payment, I have to understand like the conditions, like what business is he in? What business model do they have? How much inventory do you think they're holding? What's happening in the world right now in the economy at large? So think about what's happening in the real world. That'll help you a lot in contextualizing your data. I'd say almost focus 50-50 on how strong are my statistics and what is it that I know about the real world that's making things one way or another. And then remembering to be very skeptical and be ready to throw away a model when it just no longer holds. You're like, you know what, this is just no longer holding. I'm making these predictions and they're way far off. My expected values are way far off what is happening. Let me just kind of look at the world again and see what has changed. Because that's the tricky thing about data. It's, like I said, it's useful, but it's not true. The world is way more complicated than we think, and I think we just have to have the like humility to understand and accept that, and understand when data is wrong, and just be very scientific, very skeptical about things, and you know, be very, very open to peer review as much as possible. Have your models out there in the open. It's a very collaborative process. You know, one of my things that I try to tell my teams is like, hey, you know, the smartest people don't work for you, right? Like they work everywhere, right? So think about, you know, showing your models to different teams within the company. You know, be open to feedback from folks. Again, I think like half of the problems in complex sciences and industries like data is attitude and cultural stuff. If you're very, very open about things, like extremely open, then you'll get a good result, because you'll have more and more and more people thinking about it. And that's how you solve complex challenges. You break them down into many simple challenges, and you have a lot of people collaborate on them. So, you know, best practices for data is be very, very open about your models, be very, very skeptical, and backtest them, you know, continuously check in on them, improve them. We build a lot of models that classify things, right, to try to predict what kind of a company is a company. And you know what? We have a lot of humans in the loop. Whenever our model doesn't behave right, you know, I have thousands and thousands of hours spent labeling data just to make sure that it is still holds and is still accurate. So that's what we try to do and try to promote. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hisham.
Hello, Hisham. A quick question, if I may.
Sure.
Hi. Well, thanks very much for your presentation. My question is more from an academic perspective, but obviously the focus is on the students. Obviously, there is a growing need for data science and data scientists, and we can see academic programs being offered by various universities across the world. But the tuition fee they are charging people, they're charging a lot of money, to be honest. And I'm wondering if, as you said, a student potentially can learn these skills, programming skills from YouTube and other platforms, maybe like DataCamp. Do you think those universities, do you think it makes sense actually to apply for masters or do masters in data science and spend a lot of money, a lot of time and money doing that?
You know, it's really a personal question. I think, you know, degrees are often useful as markers in society to, you know, get credibility. But there are many other ways to get credibility. Like you can build a personal project and put something out there on the internet that's useful for folks. That's a way of building credibility, right? Remember, your question is really about two problems. One is, how do you learn the skills? And yeah, you can learn the skills from everywhere. You guys know that students just going to your class and doing your homework, that's like half of your job. The other half of your job is like thinking about things and being curious and independently studying, right? School is really meant to teach you how to think and not to give you all of the knowledge, right? And I think, you know, the spirit of, you know, your institution, I think embodies that in a good way. So use the knowledge about how to get knowledge, you know, to get more. But the second part of your question, I think, is important. And that's a credibility one, right? You know, it is an unfortunate reality, especially somewhere like Morocco, where we don't give credibility equally to everyone. We look at people's names and we look at people's faces and we look at people's experiences and where they're from to quickly assess credibility. That's wrong, right? So how do you overcome that? You overcome that with degrees, right? It's a great mechanism. It's very, somewhat accessible to folks, but as you said, it's very expensive. Other ways you can get that is through professional experience, right? Try to work somewhere, try to meet people, try to do projects that are important. Another is just, personal development stuff. Build a project, put it out there, be entrepreneurial. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to solve all the problems in the world. Just to do little small things. These things are very important to potential employers, potential investors. They're like, wow, okay, you built something, right? So build stuff. And that's an important way of getting credibility out there in the world. The cool thing about living in 2020 is that we can all self-publish, right? It's very easy for us to get our, what we built out there in the world for folks to look at. And so that would be my advice to folks, whether you do the degree or not. It's really a kind of function of where you are in terms of your own personal development. Sometimes people get degrees just because they're not ready to go into a professional environment from an emotional maturity perspective, right? They're like, you know what? I could really use 2 more years to think, and I think it'd be valuable to me as a person. So I suggest you think about it as a personal decision. Financially, it's very hard to pay bills from school and these sort of things. I'll give you a personal story. Like, I defaulted on my student loans, right? I had a lot of student loans from Columbia. I literally could not pay them. This was in 2008. It was hard to find a job. And I was like, okay, come and get me, bank. Like, I can't pay for it. And, I built my company and all the things and made some money and then eventually paid them. My point being is, it's not a do you or do you don't, but it's a little bit of a multivariate calculus. If you can, get a degree, and if it fits in your professional cycle and personal cycle, do it, because I think it's super valuable from a long-term life perspective. If you can't, find other ways to get credibility. I'm a big believer in folks ability to be kind of entrepreneurs of their own personal company, and I think it's doable in this day and age in a way that wasn't before.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you, Hisham.
Hi, Hisham. I'm back. I have a question. So we know that unstructured data is very common in big data. So my question is, do you have some tips or in your point of view, what are the best tools that you can suggest to help us transform unstructured data to structured one?
Well, it would really depend on what the project is and what the project is for, right?
Okay, let's talk about entrepreneurship, for example.
Yeah. So I'll give you 2 examples, okay? If you want to look at structured data, let's say you're a bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm always obsessed with these examples. Let's say you're a bank and you want to do a monitoring of your customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to understand which customers are in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can just set up Google alerts to look for customers if there's 500 customers. And you know what? Bank of America does this. Bank of America has a team of 10 people just sifting through Google alerts of their customers, right? This is probably the biggest bank in the United States. I don't know how big they are. They're let's see, revenues of Bank of America, right? They're well, how about this? 204,000 employees, and an annual revenue of $91 billion. And they track some of their biggest customers just with Google Alerts. Boom, solved your problem. Okay? So it's actually not that hard. But if you're doing something more sophisticated, like I want to understand if any of my customers are doing money laundering, like blanchissement d'argent, right? That's a more sophisticated problem. We're actually going to use, in addition to, we're going to now take those Google Alerts, crawl those web pages, put them in the model in TensorFlow, look at all of the companies that we have investigated that have previously done money laundering, and consistently compare their data against the ones that we found before. And you know what? I need a big database to do this, so I'm going to use I don't know, something like BigQuery or Redshift, and I need to correct for a couple of seasonalities, so I'm going to use some lightweight data analysis tool like Pandas or something like that to correct for seasonality in the data. So it's like an amalgam of tools depending on the specific problem. My one recommendation: always start with the simplest tool, right? That's the best practice for people. Start with coller your rows in Excel, right? And then graduate to Python and Spark and all of these things. That will guarantee, I think, the path towards success is always start with the simple tool and manual first. Always start manual first. The amount of time I spend in Excel over like a programming language it's absurd. It just saves me so much time. So that's my recommendation in terms of which tools. I'll send it out to the group. If Hasna, you give me the email address for everyone, I'll send out like my favorite list of tools for what kind of problems. You guys can refer to it, but the advice that I give is always start with the simplest tools.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Hisham?
Yes.
I have one simple question for you. Is like speaking about data and new technologies. So, in your opinion, what is the perfect programming language for blockchain protocols? Thank you.
Let's see. I mean, right now, I would say lingua franca is Python. Like Python is very much so the language that everyone uses. I mean, implementing an actual blockchain may require some lower level programming languages, but working with blockchain, working with the APIs that are available. I mean, if you were just to look at something like Ethereum, right, you would realize that their SDKs are in everything from JavaScript to Python. But if you look at a good thing to always check out is what is the like testing environment built in the build pipeline, right? So for something like Ethereum, I think it's Truffle, which is built, and I'm pretty positive. Oh no, actually, it looks like Truffle is it's in built-in Node. So I would say JavaScript and Python are pretty much the languages, at least of implementation in blockchain, and then some lower level languages for actually implementing blockchains in and of themselves, like C++ or something along those lines. But I'd say today most of that is abstracted as well, which is good news because those languages are very, very hard.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hisham, for your presentation. So actually, there are a lot of controversies related to big data and machine learning and whether we should welcome or fear artificial intelligence. So my question is, what are the myths and the real bad impacts of artificial intelligence that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think we should definitely fear it, right? We should fear all technology, not like in a paranoid way, but we're seeing this like surveillance, right? We're seeing bias in our news, self-reinforcing, paradigms in news, and the fact that we're being served the same stuff over and over. We're seeing data privacy. It's very easy to, figure out information about folks that should remain private. I think we have a lot of problems to deal with. Listen, I think like kind of every technological progress, we should, fear it and also use it. The example I give to people all the time is, hey, what's the kind of most memorable, technological progress, of humankind in the earliest days that people understand? And for me, that's like fire, right? The day we learned how to, kind of invent and control fire was also the day that we learned, that it was extremely dangerous. But we use it for cooking, and we use it for processing, and we use it for all of these things. Artificial intelligence is no different. It can be extremely dangerous. It can, reinforce biases. We have a conversation at the company of what we would use our technology for or what we would not use our technology for. And that's just an ethical question, right? It's kind of beyond the technology. It's like, hey, where do you stand in terms of doing good in the world? Do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing? And try to have an opinion as just to say, I'm just putting technology out there. No, you have an impact on the world no matter what you do. And I think everyone has like a daily choice in terms of making sure that impact is positive. But to give you the three things that I'd say we worry most about is bias. Is my algorithm screwing people over or a specific class of people over? Privacy. Is my algorithm exposing things that people do not give their consent to, right? And then the last one is, at the societal level, is the automation of things like journalism and so on and so forth contributing to a better conversation or restricting the conversation? Because you always want to keep, I think, the conversation as open as possible for things to be, good in progress. That's my point of view. I have a very positive view on, society in general, and I think that the more people involved in, shaping society and having the conversation, the better things will be. Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mr. Hisham,
Well, I think there is more question.
Yeah, another one. Just yeah.
Okay. Last one.
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Hisham, I have a question related to startups in data analytics. Do they tend to be like focused on one domain, or like you can like have a startup working on several domains?
I would focus, like we've focused more and more and more and it's been helpful for us because you really need to get deep in the domain. At the beginning of our business, our technology focused on so many different problems, but that was really us understanding the like power of our tech and the power of our data. And then we started to focus more and more and more on like specific problems to solve. And then we just got deeper and deeper and deeper into them. I would focus as much as possible. It's been really good for us. You can always expand once you've gotten to a really, really strong place. But, you know, start very open, then focus as much as possible. Because really, you know, the concept of like compound interest when you invest in something and you're just collecting interest and you're reinvesting that interest, like I really believe in that in data and technology. If you get data that starts to compound on each other and become more and more and more useful for solving a specific problem, it's meaningful and impactful. So start pretty wide as you like try to understand what problems you want to solve in the world, and then focus the heck out of it as much as possible. I'm a big believer in focus.
Yeah, thank you very much for the advice. Thank you.